So Tom, do you want to open us with prayer? And then I'm going to do a
Sure.
little bit of Frederick Buechner on Jacob before we move into to Joseph.
Okay, we're not going to let go of Jacob just yet. Okay, well, let's begin with prayer. Gracious God, we thank you for bringing us back together again this Thursday evening to delve into the story of Joseph and to gain new understanding through our consideration of themes that are involved in the story, an appreciation for the humanity of these people who lived so long ago. Thank you for the Bible and that it has come down to us through all these centuries. We thank you that we can continue to learn from it and grow in our ever-changing understandings of your word as it comes to us in the Bible. We thank you for each person here this evening and for their particular insights and interests and abilities to lift things out of the story that others might not see. Be with us and bless us in our endeavor tonight. And this we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
So welcome, everybody. Welcome to those who just joined us. I thought it would be fun to just do, Frederick Buechner, my probably favorite writer, has written a bunch of books, but the one I really love is this Peculiar Treasures, a Biblical Who's Who. So it's sort of like a little short snip on all of these, a lot of biblical characters. Pardon?
I think that's probably Michael.
Okay. Yeah, might be helpful to mute if you're not talking, just so that if you can do it. So it's just helpful. I try to do that when I'm on. Anyway, I'm just going to read you a little chunk on Jacob, just to kind of do a look back and then a look forward. And I love what he has to say about Jacob. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just a chunk of it.
Can I call you?
So, can you all hear me okay? Kelly, can you hear okay?
Somebody else keeps talking.
Okay, all right. Kelly, yeah. All I see is your name, Kelly, so I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, there we go.
There you are. Hi. No worries. Not worry. Okay, here we go. So Jacob dreamed that there was a ladder reaching up to heaven, and there were angels moving up and down with it, with golden sandals and rainbow-colored wings, and that standing somewhere above it was God himself. And the words God spoke in the dream were not the chewing out that you might have expected toward God and Jacob, because remember that Jacob was pretty much of a rascal, but it was something altogether different. God told Jacob that the land he was standing on belonged to him and his descendants, and that someday his descendants would become a great nation and a great blessing to all the nations on earth. And as if that wasn't enough, God then added a personal PS by saying, "Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go." Now, side note, you remember that this happened at a time when he was trying to figure out where he was going and what he was going to do, and trying to be in that place where his life was sort of before him, and he realized he had probably been pretty crummy, although maybe he didn't. Buechner goes on, it wasn't holy hell that God gave him, in other words, but holy heaven, not to mention the marvelous lesson thrown in for good measure. And the lesson was, needless to say, that even for a dyed-in-the-wool, double-barreled con artist like Jacob, there are few things in this world you can't get, but you can only be given. And one of these is love in general, and another is the love of God in particular. I think that's just a fantastic way of leading into the story of Joseph tonight, because in many ways, there's this sense of God's graciousness always showing up in our lives, even when we don't even realize that it's there. And as Buechner says, there are a few things in the world that you can't get by the wit or by the power of your own being, but there are some things that you have to only be given and receive. And so I particularly appreciate that, especially in light of who it was, this character that we were working with last week that had, I think, a really, really intense relationship with God. So Tom, I'm going to turn it to you if you want to kind of launch us into Joseph this evening.
Sure. So as I alluded to last week, this story of Joseph is my favorite part of the book of Genesis, and certainly one of my favorite biblical stories of the whole Bible. It's a saga. It is a long and in a way drawn out saga of the ups and downs of somebody's life. Figure who we know as Joseph. I'd like to draw, as I did last week and other weeks, on a lot of the work that Walter Brueggemann, biblical scholar, has done. He has an extensive amount of material on the Joseph saga in his interpretation commentary, which I am liberally drawing on tonight. So Brueggemann says that the Joseph saga is characteristic of literature written during the reign of King Solomon. And that sort of threw me when I first read that last week or whatever it was. It just hadn't occurred to me that the Joseph story would have been written either so far away from the events of the Exodus, or flip side, so long ago. So King Solomon was reigning in Judah shortly after 1000 BC. So if we think that the Exodus took place around 2300 BC, which most scholars, if it was indeed a historic event, they place it by the context that the Exodus story is set in about the year 22 to 2300 BC. King Solomon's reign was just, as you remember, after King David, his father. David's reign was around 1000 BC. So let's say that Solomon was 950 BC. So we've got, 2,000 years, maybe interval between the events that are the saga of Joseph and when it was actually written down. As you remember too, we talked about oral tradition, that, basically most of the Old Testament was conferred orally through storytelling until about the time of King David's reign. It's about 1000 BC. And very few people read. In fact, it was pretty much just the priests and the highly educated people who knew how to read Hebrew in that time, or any language. So it was written down during the era of King Solomon, and Brueggemann feels that that's pretty good guess because of the style in which it's written. Unlike the earlier oral tradition about the patriarchs and God showing up either through angels or just in moments of divine revelation, where God is there, talking to Abraham or Isaac or Jacob. In the Joseph saga, there's no direct theophany. Theophany is a Greek word that means a revelation of God, so an appearance of God. If you notice, there are none in the Joseph saga. It's all indirect. It says that God was with Joseph from the very beginning, but it doesn't say that God ever appeared to him. And Joseph just kind of proceeds assuming that God's presence and power is with him. So there's this concept of God is with me, God is with us. And Brueggemann makes the point that this is characteristic of a mindset from a time when the religion was pretty well established, and that the people of Israel were, not moving from pillar to post all the time, but had settled and were able to feel like God is with us. So that's kind of an interesting point, I thought. He also says that this saga is essentially a literary linkage between the promises of God to the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, to the liberation event of the Exodus. So somehow the action has to move from Canaan to Egypt. And how do they get there? Well, here's the story. As you remember, Abraham went down to Egypt, was there for a brief while, but came back up to Canaan. And probably during these ancient times, the nomadic people, like the Israelites were, went back and forth and back and forth. But here we get the action of the story moving from a focus in Canaan to a focus in Egypt. So in that sense, the saga is a literary connector. Also, Brueggemann says that it's a sustained and artistically crafted statement of considerable literary finesse. This is no ancient random collection of little bits of this and that. This is a well thought out and highly crafted, sustained story. It's sustained for 13 chapters, about a third of the whole length of Genesis. So this is no accident. This was very thoughtfully written. You may have noticed as you read along, and we asked you to read through chapter 44. Some of you may have read the whole thing, but tonight we're going to focus on some of the themes in 37 through 44. You may have noticed as you went through 37, you came to chapter 38, and hey, wait a minute. What is this? Story of Judah and Tamar, his wife, and their sons Er and Onan. Why it's plunked into the Joseph saga, nobody really knows. But the scholars agree, Brueggemann too, that this is an insert of independent material that has very little to do with a Joseph story, other than that Judah perhaps was an uncle of Joseph's. Also, if you read further along than what we said you needed to, if you got to chapter 46 to 49, you'll see that that is material that, again, steps out of the narrative about Joseph and gives us much more information about the ending of Jacob's life. Jacob, if you read ahead, eventually comes down to Egypt and settles through Joseph's good auspices in the land of Goshen. You ever heard like the Beverly Hillbillies use the expression land of Goshen? Well, this is where it comes from. Goshen was part of the delta area of the Nile in Egypt. It was the richest farm country because of the, what do they call it, the alluvial soil that's washed down by the Nile into the delta region. It was the best farming country. And the Israelites seem to, when they came and settled in Egypt, have been farming in that best part of the country. So Jacob's life played out down there. But when he dies, he got his sons to promise that they would carry his bones back up to Canaan land, which they did. That happens again after our part that we're supposed to be focusing on tonight. But anyway, chapters 46 to 49 seem to be inserted from another source of material, and they do not advance the plot of the Joseph story. We pick it up again there in chapter 50, right at the end of the book. So if you're interested in the structure of the saga, you can break it down into units of material. And Lucy, I don't think you got this on a PowerPoint slide
No, I
tonight.
didn't.
So folks, if you are interested in the structural divisions of the saga, just jot them down with some notes here. Chapter 37, of course, is where the saga begins. The whole chapter, verses 1 through 36, is the early life of Joseph, and it focuses on his dream.
So
And
Tom,
his-
I think it would be helpful. I know you're going to go through the rest of it, so go ahead. But then I want us to circle back, because I'd like for us to read chapter 37, because it is so primary in terms of what is going on beyond. So go ahead.
We'll circle back to it.
Yeah,
I'm
let's
just
come
briefly
back
gonna
to it.
touch on
So
these
get
units.
ready, everybody. If you don't have a Bible, grab it. And if you don't have one in reach, don't worry about it. But we're going to have a couple of you read chunks of that. So keep going. Okay.
So chapter 37, 1 through 36, Joseph's dream and his family's less than enthusiastic response to it. Chapter 39 through 41, Joseph's ups and downs in Egypt. Well, starting in Canaan and then going on through his years in Egypt. His was a seesaw life. And we're going to talk quite a bit about ups and downs, both this week and next. Then chapters 42 through 44, Joseph's reception of his brothers when they come down during the years of famine to Egypt. And he plays with them like a cat and mouse almost. Interesting part of the story, he does not reveal his identity to them just yet. He's figuring out, I guess, how he's going to relate to these SOBs who sold him downriver. And he does all kinds of things. He plays with their minds, basically. He accuses them of being spies, that they're coming to ferret out the vulnerabilities of Egypt so that eventually the Canaanites or someone whom they represent would attack Egypt and know where the country is most vulnerable. He then sends them, he then takes hostage Simeon, one of those 10 brothers who came down. He keeps him as a surety that they will go back up to Canaan and bring his younger brother Benjamin, the grown-up 2-year-old, shall we say, now, who's maybe a teenager or even a young, maybe in his 20s, down to Egypt with them. And then finally, chapters 45, well, for our consideration tonight, I won't talk about the later part of it, I sort of already have, but chapter 45, 1 through 15, is Joseph's self-disclosure to his brothers in a very dramatic telling of that story. So, all right, let's focus on chapter 37. And Lucy, you want to divide it up into units?
So if I could get somebody to read 37, 1 through 11, somebody volunteer? Margaret, go.
Chapter 37, verses 1 through 11.
Mhm.
Jacob dwelt in the land of his father's sojournings, in the land of Canaan. This is the history of the family of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. He was a lad with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought an ill report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a long robe with sleeves. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they only hated him the more. He said to them, "Hear this dream which I have dreamed. behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose and stood upright. And behold, your sheaves gathered round it and bowed down to my sheaf. His brothers said to him, are you indeed to reign over us? Or are you indeed to have dominion over us? So they hated him yet more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers, and said, behold, I have dreamed another dream. And behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves down to the ground before you? And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Could someone read verses 12 through 24, please? Okay, Sylvia, please. And then Alice, I'm going to ask you next. Okay.
Now his brothers went up to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. And he said to him, here I am. So he said to him, go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word again. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem, and a man found him wandering in the fields. And the man asked him, what are you seeking? I am seeking my brothers, he said. Tell me, I pray you, where are they pasturing the flock? And the man said, they have gone away, for I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him far off, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him to one of the pits. Then we shall say that a wild beast has devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. But when Reuben heard it, he delivered him out of their hands, saying, let us not take his life. And Reuben said to them, shed no blood, cast him into this pit here in the wilderness, but lay no hand upon him, that he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the long robe with sleeves that he wore, and they took him and cast him into a pit. The pit was empty and there was no water in it.
Thank you. Allison, would you read 25 through 28? That's the next paragraph.
Then they sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, with their camels carrying gum, balm, and resin on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, what profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers agreed. When some Midianite traders passed by, they drew Joseph up, lifting him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt.
Thank you. Would someone be willing to read the last 29 through the end of the?
I'd be happy to, Lucy.
Oh, okay. Joy, go.
When Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, the boy isn't there. Where can I turn now? Then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. They took the ornate robe back to their father and said, we found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe. He recognized it and said, it is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. No, he said, I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave.
Hmm.
So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard.
Wow. Okay. So let me just speak a few moments about some themes here, and then we'll get into our conversation. So Joseph's father favors him, Israel or Jacob, and bestows him with what Brueggemann talks about as a mantle of royalty. So this child, who is the dreamer, who has a sort of lead or a link into a dream that is more than a sort of recollection of something that happened in the past, but probably a visionary dream of a future thing happening. That's the way it was interpreted. He also is seen as what we might talk about as a gifted child. When you say that what you've read about this person, that there was something in him that his father saw, not only because, it says he was the child of his old age, and he was the child of the barren wife who bore the child in late life, the first child, and then died in childbirth with the second child. But in a sense, what's happening with this robe that becomes a really interesting metaphor all the way through is that it's almost like anticipates what he is going to be. And Brueggemann talks about the robe as a mantle of royalty. And what happens from the robe is that the robe is taken from him, and he is essentially dethroned by his brothers in terms of the family pecking order. We're not talking about him being royalty in any other sense, but his father seeing him as bestowing him with this gift of a robe, and his brothers basically try to kill him. But they're not only killing him, and they're not only dethroning him, if you will, by taking his robe, but they're also trying to kill the dream. Okay? So the dream has been given to him, and even his father is dismissing the dream. His father sides with the brothers, sort of, but in a way he doesn't, because if you notice, he basically says, I'll think about this. I'm going to think about the dream. I'm not going to drop it. I'm going to think about it. But sort of like Brueggemann talks about, he says sort of like the Magnificat of Mary, that it's like, that something is coming and something magnificent is going to happen. And you're going to ponder those things in your heart in the Revelation. So in a way, the father thinks when the mantle comes back with the blood on it, that the dream is dead. And he says he will not rest until he stays in Sheol with his own son. There is something, we're going to talk about ups and downs. This is an up and down story. He goes down in the pit, and then he's drawn out of the pit, and he's brought up, and then he is sold into Egypt and goes down to Egypt. There's all kinds of ups and downs in the story. And next week, we're actually going to have you listen to a sermon by James Forbes. It's really a powerful sermon talking about the ups and downs of Joseph's life. So this is not original to Tom and me at one level, but it is in a sense in the story. Tom, do you want to pick it up then to talk about the realization of the dream and that theme that runs through it? And then we really want to get to the questions that we asked you to think about ahead of time. So we are aware of time, so we aren't going to spend a lot of time lecturing, if you will, or talking about that from our perspective, but want to draw it out of you. So
I
you
just
want
want
to
to just touch briefly, in case you didn't thoroughly read the stuff through chapter 44, that there are a lot of ups and downs. He gets down to Egypt, and he's a part of Potiphar's household. Potiphar is the chief of the guards for the Pharaoh, apparently. And Mrs. Potiphar wants to get down with Joseph. This is something that you'll hear perhaps next week when we listen to James Forbes' sermon. But anyway, but he stands up on his principles, and he gets eventually imprisoned on suspicion that when Mrs. Potiphar frames him and falsely accuses him of sexual harassment. He's down as far as you can go in prison at that point, but then he meets the cupbearer and the baker of the Pharaoh, who also are being imprisoned in the prison there with him, and he interprets their dreams correctly, and they're duly impressed, though it's only the cupbearer who gets out of prison with his life, gets to back into the Pharaoh's court and duly forgets Joseph there, who had said, please mention me to the Pharaoh to get me out of here. I'm innocent. 2 years pass before the cupbearer hears the Pharaoh has had this insoluble dream. He says, oh yeah, there was that guy there that I did time with who was really good at interpreting. Yeah, what was his name? Anyway, so Joseph gets called up to the Pharaoh's court, interprets the Pharaoh's dreams in a way that impresses the Pharaoh. Pharaoh places Joseph in charge, the second in command of agriculture in Egypt. And Joseph impresses everybody, because as it says, God is with Joseph, and everything that Joseph touches essentially turns to gold, because God is with him. God is blessing Egypt through Joseph. So he gets up in his experience in Egypt. And then his brothers come down during the years of famine, when the whole world, it says, was experiencing famine. So we've gone from the up again on the roller coaster ride down the depths of famine. And Joseph sees his brothers when they come before him asking for grain. He doesn't reveal his identity to them at first. As I said, he wants to figure out how he's going to deal with them. And he toys with them for a while. They go on back up to Canaan, and then they bring Benjamin, the younger brother, down with them, and eventually Father Jacob down with them to Egypt. So on it goes, up and down, up and down, up and down. But where we want to focus is on the questions that we gave you to consider. First one had to do with the role of dreams, because this story is about the realization of Joseph's dream. It's a theme that runs through the whole saga. From that chapter 37, when he first shares his two dreams that are so disturbing to his family, to the eventual realization of those dreams, in that his brothers come down and have to bow before him. Not only the brothers, but the whole nation of Egypt ends up bowing down in front of him for his the giftedness that he has in being able to plan ahead for the years of famine. So the dream. Let me phrase it this way. What importance do you assign to dreams in your life? And do you feel that dreams indeed can be a vehicle of communication from God to humans, or specifically to you? What do you think? Yeah, Debbie.
Well, I wouldn't rule it out completely. I haven't had that kind of experience, but I had something similar once when I was in college. I was taking an East Asian history, and so was my roommate. We were in the same class. And before the midterm exam, I had a dream that I flunked the exam and she got an A. And then when we got our exams back, he praised her for such a good essay she wrote on the exam. And I ended up with a C. So in a way, I told her about the dream then, and she said, oh, have some more dreams like that.
Mm.
In the meantime, I figured out what was going on, and I browned it up to the professor, and then I ended up with an A too. But anyway, it was really weird how I had that dream ahead of time because I was studying and she wasn't studying. She just crammed the night before and she ended up with an A. But somehow my dream told me that. I don't really know. Very strange. I don't know how that occurred.
I find that it's repeated dreams that seem to be the best messages to me. I
So
don't.
a theme that becomes apparent through the repetition in dreams.
Yes, whether it's the same events or the same people or the same place, I'm being told to do something. And oh, excuse me, being told to get a glass of water.
Okay, she'll be back.
While Margaret's
Well,
getting a glass of water,
yeah.
somebody else.
Kelly,
The
go
only
ahead.
I was gonna
Kelly,
say
go
while
ahead.
we're waiting, the only repeated dream I ever had, and I had it many times, was that I had a clarinet embedded in one of my arms. And I never became a clarinet player. I mean, other than in the high school band. So I tend to have dreams where I'm the hero, which scares me a little bit. I'm like this action hero. I save people from physical danger. And when Alan appears in my dream at all, he's not bad, but he never saves me. So I tend not to believe in those
She's
dreams.
self-saving.
I guess I'm not such a hero in real life that I love my dreams because usually, except when they're frightening, which is rare, it's like, oh, yay. Yeah, but I don't have anyone that I can say that's significant that pointed me towards anything. I gave my clarinet away eventually.
You have people who are bowing down to you in those dreams.
No, never.
When you're a hero.
No, they just take it for granted.
Margaret, why don't you finish and then we'll go to Kelly.
Okay, to finish my thought, if something comes back to me repeatedly, I go away from thinking I got the idea and I shift to I am being given the idea. It's like somebody's telling me something and I think, oh, I heard something. And then I finally recognize, oh, somebody's telling me this. And if I act on whatever it is, then it'll kind of go away.
Fascinating. How about you, Kelly?
I've always been fascinated by dreams. And I do believe that they're messages, and doctors will tell you that if you look closely, it's often what's going on in your life and it comes out in a dream, which often isn't reality, but that if you study these dreams, they are centered around your life and what's going on and your concerns. And so, as I said, I've read up on it, and I always look at dreams from more of a scientific standpoint than God talking to me. I wish God would talk to me through a dream, and maybe he has, but it's not something I've noticed yet. It's usually something I'm worried about or something. And talking about college, I was short by 1 credit and it completely flipped me out. And I was like, what, I have to go back to school for a semester? And I started dreaming about that I'd flunked and I was panicked and what I was going to do with my life. So, as I said, when I really look at my dreams, they usually tie into what's going on personally for me.
If any of us had-
I want to ask a question. Judy will get to, I want you to think about this, and Judy, you can go, and then, but the question is, why do you think in this biblical narrative, God spoke through dreams? If we had believed that what was happening in this sort of revelatory moment for Joseph, why does God use that as a device for revelation? I want you to think about that, and I really want you all to help me with it. But Judy, go ahead, please.
I'm in kind of a different position. I have never, ever had a dream in my life
Interesting.
that I remember. No, I don't. I go to sleep and I wake up and that's it.
You're lucky.
Very lucky.
No, I don't think so, because
Well,
there-
in a sense, it's just
there have been
exhausting.
times where I wish maybe they tell me that I dream, but I'm not in touch with them.
Mm.
So Judy, I might be on the other end of the spectrum from you in the dream world, because sometimes I have incredible dreams. I used to have them a lot more than I have them now as an old man, but I've had occasionally what's the word? Premonitions in dreams, where I have dreamt something that later on it happens.
Mm.
Just the details are uncannily close to the way it actually happens later on. It's happened to me, a handful of times in my 70 years, so it's not very frequent, but it has happened. So at least I'm example A of someone who has had premonitions that have come true in dreams. Or
This guy
dreams
sitting,
that have come true in life, I mean.
this guy sitting next to me says that I do my dreaming during the day.
Okay.
He said he can,
That's cool.
You gotta do it sometime.
he said he can see me. And Tom, when you were talking about that, especially in college seems to be, I can remember saying to some of my hallmates and some things, and they'd say, well, how do you know that? And it was like I was predicting.
Mm.
And I don't, but during the night,
Happen.
Well, I have go ahead. I'm not going to interrupt with my theological questions yet. We'll keep going
Well,
on.
I
Go
like your
ahead,
question
please.
though. I like the one about why dreams versus direct communication. And I thought it's training. Joseph
Ooh.
needs to be trained on
Hmm.
this method of receiving messages, right? Otherwise, he can't fulfill his mission of interpreting the Pharaoh's dreams. And I'm guessing that God didn't feel that Pharaoh would pay any attention if he came directly and said, hey, I'm God and you better do this.
Mhm.
Fascinating.
Pharaoh, I don't think would have been receptive.
I love it.
So that's my thought.
he-
They say that many of your dreams you don't remember. It depends on your level of sleep. And that, God may be talking to us in the dreams that we don't remember, and they manifest themselves in good things that happen the next day. But we don't remember dreaming about it. But I'll often go, oh, thank you, God. I worried about this and you took care of it the next day. So he may be talking to me when I'm in REM sleep. Because if you look at dreams, there's all different levels, but they say you don't remember most of them.
What
I-
else? Keep going. Allison, you had something.
I was going to say, don't remember them, or it's like it's fog. You reach for it, you think you've got what it was, and then you start to say, and it's like, no, I don't think so. And it just, it gets harder and harder to capture.
Mhm. That fog is something that's happened to me. Sometimes I get up, turn the radio on, and start thinking, well, why are they talking about Thursday? It's supposed to be Wednesday. And I was dreaming about Wednesday, trying to get that all settled. And then, oh, it's Thursday now. Oh, okay.
I kind of have a hunch that there's also, I love your insight, Alan, about that, about, you have to have the dream and be able to learn how to have dreams to be able to interpret them, if I heard you correctly. But I think there's also this sense, and I think it's a really interesting idea, that we're kind of out of control when we're sleeping. We're
Mhm.
way out of control when we're sleeping. And you never know what's going to show up. And I think it makes some sense to me, especially with these sort of prototypical human beings that we're studying in this very, very ancient literature, that there is this sense of a kind of, the veil is lifted a little bit with them. I mean, that tends to be another one of the themes, that the veil lifts, that there is a kind of immediacy to the presence of God for a lot of people. But in this case, it's not a theophany, as Tom was talking about. It's really a kind of indirect communication, and Joseph's out of control. And it's really interesting. If you listen to what we just read in 37 in the chapter, you know, Joseph is sort of naive. I mean, he just kind of comes up and says, well, I had this dream, you know, and had no idea maybe what the implications of that were until his father and his brothers, what, are we going to be bound down to you? It might have been that he was just sitting there going, you know, I had this dream, but did not go to that place of this is what it meant.
Mhm.
So Joy, you're shaking your head. I'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
I was just agreeing with you, Lucy, about the naivete, that I think he was too young, or he didn't judge the impact that revealing that to his brother
Yeah.
and his fathers would have, that it would cause them to actually hate him enough to consider killing him.
There
I
you
don't
go.
think that years later, that the baker particularly appreciated his
Yeah,
interpretation.
yeah,
His dream
yeah.
came true. Ooh.
I always wondered what did the baker do?
What did
Yeah.
what did he do?
Yeah.
So there's a vulnerability to also when you're sleeping, I
Mhm,
think.
mhm.
Yeah, I think when you're asleep, your ego or your id, I can't remember my personality studies, but is out of the way. And so you can receive messages, you know, and perhaps they're from God, or perhaps they're from your own psyche figuring things out. But in this case, in these cases, I would think it's God is able to reach down and convey a message, because your perception of yourself and who you are is not in the way. So you're open. And
So why
vulnerable.
did he need the dream? Why did he need that dream? I mean, couldn't have all this just played its way out without that happening?
Well, it's a better plot line.
Right, it
Crazy.
is, certainly. And maybe
And it gi-
Tom's, yeah, go ahead, please.
And it gives him credibility because it's been predicted, I think.
Oh, interesting.
I think it's interesting too, that there are times when we wonder if someone is a vision or it is a dream. In this case, we're told it's a dream. In all the cases, they had a dream. Because in other cases, like with the wrestling and things, we don't always know.
Mhm.
I
So I
also,
wanted to take us to another level on this and think about, how do we receive dreamers in our culture today? Do we receive them any more gently and open-mindedly than Joseph's brothers received him? Chapter 37:19 says, here comes the dreamer. Come now, let's kill him and throw his body into a pit. At first we think, oh my God, how could they be so cruel? But when you think about how we receive dreams in our culture today, and I'm thinking specifically, and you don't need to agree with me on this, but I'm thinking like Black Lives Matter is a dream that is before our culture today. And what kind of reception, not only is that dream, but those who are dreaming it, receiving in our society today?
I think
Usually now, if you say I had a dream, right away, somebody says, oh, no, it's not in the budget, forget it.
Yeah. I can't do, no can do.
I think it depends on whether you agree with the dream. If you agree with the dream, you like the dreamer. If you don't agree with the dream, you're not so fond of the dreamer.
And also dreamers are usually a positive, is that saying that Martin Luther King Jr. never said, I had a nightmare. He always said, I had a dream. So dreams give you a hopeful vision.
Right.
I think the dreamers you see in children who usually walk to the beat of a different drum and creative in that, and very frequently they are bullied, just like Joseph by his brothers. And it's on the media a fair amount about the very creative child that's being bullied. And unfortunately, some of it turns up when they commit suicide. So the dreamers still. And one smart aleck comment at this point when we were talking about God communicating. This dream is one way he communicates. But if you remember in one of the earlier classes, I said I was envious of Moses because God communicated with Moses through the burning bush. And that was a different form of communication.
Mhm.
So you kind of have to be eyes open, alert to when the signals are coming to you. And it doesn't come to everybody the same way.
Yeah.
Well, Joseph's dream was extremely threatening to his brothers and even to his father because it was about power. And they viewed themselves as the rightful heirs because they were the older brothers. Not this little whippersnapper coming here and telling us that we're going to bow down to him. No way, we're not doing it. And they, not only once, but twice he does it, or we don't know how many times he actually brought up these dreams to them, but it provoked a very threatened feeling in them, and their response became violent, and they wanted to rub out the dreamer and thus get rid of the dream.
He was also a tattletale. I mean,
He was a little
little spoiled snot. So why?
But he was
tattletales. He gets a nice coat, and then he tells them that they're going to bow down to him. I mean, like, who would like that?
Yes, but he was gifted. Remember, and oftentimes the kids who are really, really bright and have figured things out can be very irritating to those who think that they're older and they've got the ins. They don't need this kid telling me what to do and what's going to happen. So I just, again, I won't beat a dead horse here, but I do see a connection to our cultural situation in the U.S. today, where some people in power are not particularly enthused about the idea of Black Lives Matter, and to get rid of it, they want to get rid of the dreamers. They won't fund projects, as Craig was alluding to. They say that's low priority. We're not doing that. We're the ones who decide. We're in power here, and we don't want to see a change, and we don't want to see other people take the power role from us. As a white man, I guess I can give voice to that. There's a little bit of that goes on in me when I hear some of the things that people through Black Lives Matter say need to change. It's not an entirely welcoming reception, I guess is what I'm pointing to in our culture.
Sylvia had something.
I struggle with not limiting God. And I think that that's the challenge now as our church thinks about the next 150 years, to not limit the dreams we're hearing and to be open to the people who come to us with their dreams. That's what I pray for. And my dreams at night, to try to shut them off. And sometimes I feel like I do my best thinking at night, but that's not my best thinking. I think that that's God's speaking to me. So
I think the dream is even more disruptive than than power. I really do. I think that the disruption that happened through this dream, it may have been, I mean, it was like, here's this kind of between the boys, the brothers, and the dad being threatened by the power that was displayed, or was the part of the message of the dream. But I think the dream itself, it's like when someone has a vision or has a dream, why did they get that and I didn't get it? Why did they get the revelation and I didn't get it? So frankly, I think that Brueggemann essentially pushes that point pretty hard and says that really what they were doing was not so much killing him or the mantle that he was wearing, but they were trying to kill the dream, because that's something that is hard to tame. It's hard to work with in this system of power and no power. What were you going to say, Joy?
Yeah, I was just thinking on, just your average meeting, how many times have any of us heard somebody comes up with an idea of anything, and the first person to speak will say, "Let me be the devil's advocate." And right there, all the air just goes out of it. And so I think one of the lessons we could take is to, try not to be that person who sticks the pin in immediately. But sometimes it's hard to do. But I think, this book by Adam Grant, where he says, think again. He said, when you hear something that challenges you, that you don't think is maybe right, the first thing you should do is think again, and maybe not be quite so quick to speak as we all sometimes are.
I was
Hey,
back.
just a second, Kelly. I think Craig had something, and then we'll go to you. Sorry.
Yeah, it's not quite related to dreams, but the whole story of the sequence of Joseph. How many of us have been in a situation where we've had a really pretty decent job, we thought we were going to have a whole career out of it, and suddenly we just get messed over and fired and punished, thrown into the pit. And if it hadn't been for that, we wouldn't have had the next job that was a whole lot better. The great opportunity that came out of it, that wouldn't have been there if we just not made any waves, kept our nose clean.
Point. I'd like to pick that one up for next week, because I think it really works with where we're going to go next week. So thank you for that. Kelly, go ahead.
Just quickly, you talking about God giving Joseph that dream. I looked at it that maybe God gave him that dream and wanted him to go present it to his brothers that way, to set up the circumstances for what was going to happen. He wanted Joseph to go through these ups and downs and become humbled and a stronger person. So I thought it was the catalyst for Joseph's, what happened in his life from then on.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. That's a pretty right on the money, right on target kind of interpretation of it.
One other question I wanted us to consider before we close tonight, but we're sort of running out of time, is how do you handle prayers that go unanswered and dreams that get deferred? How do you personally handle that? I mean, I'm thinking about Joseph in the prison there, had his hopes up that the word was going to get to the Pharaoh, and 2 years followed where he had been forgotten, entirely forgotten. Not entirely, fortunately, but it took 2 years for the guy, the cupbearer, to remember, oh yeah, Joseph, that guy.
For me,
That happens to us. How do we handle it?
For me, it's, those, I forgot what I was going to say. Sorry.
It is happening to me right now. I lost my most recent job in August of 2019. I'm still hunting. I'm still asking. I'm still looking. Getting coaching from the Career Transition Center, which is marvelous. Great support. But I still have to keep asking, reminding people. And the hardest part is following up to say, hey, I applied for this job 6 weeks ago, a month ago. have you seen the application? How is it going? When are interviews going to be? That sort of thing. Is there somebody I should talk to about it? Just the following up is the draining part. I'd almost rather get a new application in and say, hi, this is something I'd like to do, rather than, have you considered it yet?
Yeah, yeah,
So the waiting
Margaret.
can be very draining,
very hard.
but lessons like this of patience that had even happened to Joseph are good for me.
That's beautiful, Margaret. That's beautiful.
I thought what I was, there's a correct time for everything. You know, had the cupbearer sort of talked about Joseph right away, Pharaoh would have said, who cares? I'm not interested. So coming up at that time, to me, there's an optimum time for prayers to be answered to have the most impact. So
Alan, that reminds me of what my dad would have said about that kind of thing. In other times when I've gone through things like that before Dad died, he would say, there have been so many times when there's been something I wanted to do to help you, but I knew you weren't ready for it yet.
Yep. There you go.
The Greek word, a couple words in Greek for time, kairos and chronos. Chronos is how we measure time on a clock. Kairos means it's the right time for something to happen.
When I was first at Fourth in the mid-'80s, there was a young people's group called Kairos. And the differences that we used to define those words were Chronos is, it's the 25th day of December. And Kairos was that moment when you see something, you feel something, you hear something, and you think, it's Christmas.
There you go. It's beautiful. So I hope that you all are feeling this sort of anticipation of next week when we will wrap up the Genesis text. But I also hope that you're feeling a little bit of kind of edginess and like almost like frustration with this process, because we have just really skimmed over things, really the surface. I mean, I'm not saying we've been superficial. We've really tried to kind of carry ourselves into these texts with honest engagement and with insight and with some relevance for our own lives, which, you know, we need to do in these studies. But I have to say that we are just beginning to look at these texts and the impact that they would have. And so I want you all to realize that, I think the thing I realize is that in this study that we are just beginning, and the resources that are at the core, at the depth of these texts, we could spend the whole 7 weeks on this one chapter, chapter 37 of Genesis. We could, on dreams, on what is a sheave, why were they standing up, why were they down, all this kind of thing. So there's lots there. But next week we will finish the text, and Tom's basically said there may be parts of what's coming up that seem a little bit of weird or out of sequence, or how did that
So
fit
if you
in?
would read 45 through the end of the book, so 45, 1 through 50, verse 26 for next week, the resolution of this saga.
Yep.
And then Lucy and I are looking forward to sharing with you James Forbes' sermon on this. We heard him preach in person the first version of his ups and downs sermon many years ago at the Earl Lectures at Pacific School of Religion. He's adapted this sermon for different circumstances and different eras. And his most recent one is the one I think that we're going to share with you next week, which was done even after the Capitol riot of January 6th last year.
Wow, great.
Recorded.
And for those of you that don't know who James Forbes is, he was the former preacher at Rockefeller, no, not Rockefeller Chapel, that's the wrong place. Riverside Church, but I know Rockefeller built Riverside Church, that's why I have that association, along with the University of Chicago, Rockefeller Chapel. So, and he is a powerful, has he ever been here? Has he ever come to Fourth?
Not so that I can remember back to 87.
Okay, yeah.
Charlotte and I
he was-
saw him for a week in Chautauqua. several years
Okay,
ago.
yeah. So you know what you're in for. He's a powerful presence, and we'll just play through the sermon and then we'll just pick it up and talk it through with each other, you know, kind of how this story resolves. But as you know, this story is a powerful, powerful story, and we'll find it in our own lives. So would someone be willing to close us with prayer tonight?
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Margaret.
Holy God, thank you for calling us together once more to consider your action in the life of Joseph and his family. Thank you for Tom and Lucy's leadership and everyone's wonderful contributions. Thank you for continuing to lead us even when we're not sure we see where we're going. Go with us now into the new week and help us study and observe what you would have us learn as we reach the end of the course. In Jesus' name, amen.
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 Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Have a good
Good
night.
night.
Okay, bye.